11:30 in the morning on a Friday. Really, thank you everybody in advance for being here. It means a lot to me to have a nice crowd at 11:30. Listen, I'm a night person. I'm not a morning person. This is not my milieu. While I present my oeuvre, I demur.
You were right.
Let me know if video is ready to go.
Ready?
And by the way, don't worry about getting me in the shot. The more you just capture the screen, the better. It's all about the screen.
It's good. We're rolling. You're good.
Okay, are you ready? Here we go.
When Captain America rose his mighty shield, all those who chose to oppose his shield but yield. They led to a fight and a duel ensued, and the red and the white and the blue come through when Captain America rose his mighty shield.
Now that's the cover that we were presented with as comic fans in the early months of 1969. You see the date, February, but in comic book terms that means the comic was on sale usually 3 months earlier. So this really came out in the late fall or early winter of 1968, which means Steranko himself wrote and drew this series during that turbulent year of 1968. So it's interesting how some of that energy you're going to see even from the shock lines. I mean, right away, Steranko redesigned the Captain America logo. I'll show you the early one in a minute or so. We're met with a giant Hulk. And then, of course, we're met with Bucky, who we hadn't seen in Captain America in the modern era. And of course, the real first thing we said was, Steranko's doing Captain America? Because we were blown away by what Steranko had been giving us the previous 2 or 3 years in Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. This cover coming out in the spring of 1968, in the most psychedelic year, the most psychedelic comic cover. I mean, Peter Max, who was known by the mainstream world for his, he didn't call his stuff psychedelic, he called images like this his cosmic paintings. And you can see the influence on Steranko, but Steranko brought what was happening in the real world into comics. And with figures like this, in addition to psychedelia, Steranko could also do the exact opposite, which was Gothic at its finest. So you'll see in this Captain America series the whole range of Steranko's comic book loves, his influences. The other thing Steranko was known for was that he was not only a great artist, but he was a great writer, and not only a great writer of fiction, but he wrote in 1970, this is a wraparound cover for Volume 1 of what is still the definitive history of the Golden Age, the Steranko history of comics. 2 years later, with a redesigned masthead, we got the wraparound cover for Volume 2. Here is Jaunty Jim, handsome guy, right around the time, 1970, so he's 32 years old, in the prime of his life. Here he is right here, looking cool, in front of, and you know, it's interesting that these images are in black and white, because Steranko so used black and white to its zenith in comic art in incredible covers like this. Again, coming out right in the middle of 1968, the most turbulent year in American history, maybe. And look at how he took that design and brought it into full color for Captain America. So ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're here to discuss today, is why a man who created very few comics for Marvel Comics, Jim Steranko, maybe created his greatest Marvel work, some might say, with his trilogy of Captain America issues. So my name is Arlen Schumer. I'm an illustrator who works in comic style. I'm also a comic book historian. I did this book, The Silver Age of Comic Book Art, which I have obviously on sale in the dealer's room over there. What my book is basically about is treating these 8 American artists who I believe, in the same way we look back 500 years ago on the great Renaissance masters of the human figure, like Michelangelo and Da Vinci and Raphael, I truly believe 500 years from now, when they unearth this book from the atomic rubble, they will say, I said tough crowd, but they will say that these men were our masters of the human figure and giants in the field of artwork, and they'll say, hey, this guy Arlen Schumer knew what was going on. And I took a quote from each artist that really talked about, if I could find one line that summed up their whole point of view. And you'll notice this is a running theme, that these incredible artists, these incredible illustrators that made so many of us in that room and right here become artists. Oh, I'm not an artist, I'm a storyteller. You know, Neil Adams said the same thing. Look, you see, people think we're creating art. Well, guess what? It's both a dessert topping and a floor wax. It's commercial art and it's art. So, here's the double-page spread intro of the Steranko chapter. Like all the chapters, I ghost an image of significance behind the type. Obviously, that's his greatest Captain America, one of the greatest Captain America images of all time, and we will talk about this image later. But it's really Nick Fury, the Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., who, if you remember those pictures of Steranko, obviously that's how Steranko sees himself. Younger people out there in the audience, you of course know Nick Fury as Samuel L. Jackson, and you know the TV show on ABC. But where did this whole S.H.I.E.L.D. thing come about? Well, it came about, of course, because of the Bond craze of the mid-'60s. Most primarily, Goldfinger is really, in the fall of '64, what really kicked it off. So, since comic books reflected always what was happening in the culture, how did DC Comics react to the Bond craze? With crap like this. But we love it now. But I mean, even as a kid, we thought this was stupid. What did they do over at Marvel? Of course, Marvel had Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby, in one of the earliest examples of a pop culture reboot, we talk about reboots now, he took his World War II character, which was his knockoff of Sergeant Rock over DC, and he said, what if we bring Sergeant Fury from World War II through some cockamamie comic book explanation of some, I don't know, what was it, some magic serum or something, and lo and behold, in the summer of '65, this came out from Marvel, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And you can see it shared comics like a lot of Marvels were dual character comics with Doctor Strange by Ditko. And the thing is, it was really Ditko's Doctor Strange that was the A feature, but they treated Nick Fury like as if it was the A feature. And Kirby, for that first year, from '65 to '66, really only did layouts. And other artists would embellish or ink them, like John Severin, and it was really a Marvel B, if not C character. But all of a sudden, late in 1966, in the year of Batmania, you know, Marvel was competing with what was happening at DC with Batmania. All of a sudden, you notice the strange signature. What is and who is a Steranko? And then when you open up the comic, you saw the splash page. Again, layouts by Kirby and illustrations by this guy, Jim Steranko. And without only 1 or 2 or 3 issues, I forget, maybe somebody out there knows, all of a sudden, for the first time in Marvel and DC history, we see a credit for written and drawn by a single artist. Of course, Stan Lee's name always has to come first, even though he did next to nothing on this issue, but that's for another lecture. Anyway, look at what Steranko was doing right from the get-go in 1967 by paying homage to the great illustrators that influenced him, in this case, the great Wally Wood of EC. Needless to say, the other great artist he was paying homage to with every issue was Kirby himself, specifically Kirby's Captain America. Now, how did Captain America, to make a long story short, come back into the Silver Age, since he hadn't been published since 1955? In the spring of '64, Kirby brings him back in the page of the Avengers because of the death of John F. Kennedy. Kirby, like most of America, was grief-stricken and wanted to bring Captain America back as a proxy substitute for JFK. And overnight in 1964, Captain America is immediately successful under Kirby's tutelage, and he gets the shared feature with Iron Man. By the way, one of the very few times Kirby draws the red and yellow Iron Man, but every time he did, he owned it. We'll talk about Gene Colan later. Here's the splash page from that very first issue. Now, the thing about Kirby and Captain America is, while he said the thing was the character that was most like him in terms of personality and the whole attitude of the thing. Captain America was his favorite character to draw because of movement and action. And that's what Kirby loved to draw the most. And you can see it in this one image inked by the great Chick Stone. Again, we will discuss Kirby's inkers at a later date. Here, again, overnight, May of '65, within 1 year, he becomes basically the leader of Marvel Comics, the head of the Avengers. And then, you know, Tales of Suspense, it shifted to full covers every other issue. And a lot of these images by Kirby appearing in February of '67 were later used for a million merchandising. You've seen that figure on a million things. So later on in '67, you get Steranko's first homage in issue 159, a 3-issue story, issue 161, a great splash page, and a great full-page image that really starts to show you all of the Steranko visual motifs that would reappear in all of his later work. I mean, look at look at that shoulder. Come on, Jim. Relax a little. But here's the basic thing about Kirby and Captain America. Here's a 1967 panel done at around the same time. You young cartoonists out there, if you want to know how to get speed, action, energy, power, motion lines, speed lines. Every Kirby image like this is a primer on how to get motion and energy in your work. Now Steranko, like every other superhero artist at the time, but specifically Steranko, he took this type of Kirby energy and gave it back to us on steroids. Or maybe on acid. Because he started to bring that psychedelic thing into S.H.I.E.L.D. in '67. And you start to see even in the interior designs. I mean, anybody watch Mad Men? Remember that great sunken living room? You know, there was Steranko, 50 years ahead of his time. Look at the photographic background, and look at the piece of op art on the wall. Now, here we are 50 years later, we artists, we're still trying to figure out how Steranko got these incredible black and white effects. Now, he was influenced by Bridget Riley, shown here in 1965 at the Big Museum of Modern Art op art show, at the height of op art. And she was like the doyenne of op art, and you can see the influence on Steranko in that classic psychedelic issue that comes out a couple years later in '68. So while Steranko was paying homage to fine artists in the fine art world, he was also very aware of his comic history. But the thing is, we fans in 1968, we didn't even know who Will Eisner was. Unless you bought those Harvey annuals that came out in '66, which if anybody remembers, I was a superhero zombie. I looked at that cover, I said, I can't buy this. A superhero in a business suit? Had I opened that cover, my life would have changed. I would have seen splash pages like this. But look at how, you know, these incredible images by Steranko are also paying homage to Will Eisner. And then when this is issue 1, you had to actually turn the page around to read it. So Steranko, as a graphic designer, as a consummate comic storyteller, would actually make you physically do what the character was doing. I mean, we talk about meta, but Steranko understood meta. Now, at the same time he's doing this in '68, Robert Crumb is dropping acid in San Francisco and doing these psychedelic layouts. So there was psychedelia going on above ground and underground. Meanwhile, at the same time, Kirby, Captain America is given his own title in the spring of '68 when Marvel expanded their line. Remember I said Steranko redesigned the logo? Here's the classic Captain America logo. Later that year in '68, as Steranko is leaving S.H.I.E.L.D., he creates some keynote images in his oeuvre. But this head by Marie Severin and John Romita is the discussion of a whole nother lecture. Then he decides, for whatever reason, to do a couple of shows with X-Men. Notice the old logo, and then I'll show you the new logo later on. But look at, again, the Eisner influence on some of these splash page images, incorporating type into image. Look at the new logo he designs for X-Men, and, you know, right there. Now, the other cover he does the same month is one of his greatest, if not his greatest cover, that once again is paying homage to the great Wally Wood. Right? And then, January of '69, The last issue that Kirby does of Captain America, he retells his origin. And then I think the reason why Steranko does this 3 issues, I think it's because Kirby was moving to California in '69. And I think he had to drop something, and for whatever reason, Steranko said, you know, let me jump in, I'll do 3 issues. And we'll talk about why he did these issues the way they did. Of course, the first one, you turn the cover and you're met with this beautiful splash page, one of his greatest, but again, we look back now, but at the time, we didn't see this because we didn't know who Will Eisner was. But Steranko did. And then you come in for one of his great, you know, people talk about comics or films on paper. Well, this is what they mean when they say film on paper. Steranko instinctively understood that comics were in panels and a cinematic timing. There are books written about this stuff. But of course, who was the first one? Who's the D.W. Griffith of comics who first understood this and gave it to the world, although the world did not understand it at first, like most great things? Look at the influence on the great Bernie Krigstein in 1955 when he does Master Race. But again, Eisner does it first, and then Krigstein. And then years later, in '67, Steranko was doing it. So it was no surprise to us Steranko-philes when we saw this beautiful opening sequence, because we had come to expect that from Steranko. And then we get this beautiful splash page. Now, remember I said Stan Lee has to put his name in front of everything? Well, the same year, Marvel comes out with this feature in the back of their annuals. So there's, of course, Stan Lee at the time. And then we get, look at how Steranko is characterized, the caliph of creativity. But yes, Steranko conceived this, wrote it, drew it. He is the auteur of this. And yet, look whose name is first. I bet you Stan Lee did nothing on this other than being a glorified traffic manager. But yet his name is first. And to the layman, to us comic fans, we didn't know behind the scenes stuff. This looked like to us that Stan Lee wrote it, just like he wrote all of Kirby's stuff, and Steranko just penciled it. Well, let's talk about the penciling and the inking. First of all, Steranko got Sinnott, made Marvel's greatest inker, Kirby's greatest inker, although Mike Royer, if he's here, he's not here, I still say Sinnott. But if Royer was here, I would say. Anyway, I love Mike Singh, so that's a whole other story. But yes, Prince of Pen and Ink, Jack Kirby's great inker, there he is. And he had recently inked a stretch of Captain America in '68. That is, the, you know, in my eyes, the definitive Silver Age Captain America, because it's Kirby at his zenith with Sinnott's incredible inks. And then you even have incredible lettering. I mean, how often do you get to see pictures of these letterers, you know? But yeah, Sam Rosen, one of the great Marvel letterers, and as I go through this trilogy, even from the first page, notice the variety of the great lettering. I mean, look, just when you turn the page, the first double page spread you're hit with, before we even talk about anything Steranko wrote and drew, just look at the variety of lettering. Look at the mixture of bold italic with Roman. This is great comic book lettering at its best. And the other thing to notice about these issues, Steranko colored them. And within the limitations of old school Ben-Day dot, hand-cut screens by housewives in Connecticut somewhere, I don't know what the story is. But notice how Steranko uses color in a stylized way and using monochromes. Then, of course, there are some panels that are overwritten. Did we really need to read 2 green hands smashing through? But whatever, I'll give that to Steranko. But again, look at the variety of the lettering, you know, all of a sudden it gets well. Now, Steranko might have indicated that, but I bet you in a lot of places it's just Sam Rosen doing what he does best. Now, this figure, again, this is Steranko doing his best Kirby. It's a little abstract, it's a little warped, but somehow it works. And this figure was so powerful that Rolling Stone's English edition used it in a October '69 issue. And it was articles like this, it was because of what Steranko was doing by bringing psychedelia into his comic art, that it was Marvel that got all the hip coverage and using, remember, Undergrounds and Overgrounds were both doing psychedelia and using the psychedelic, you know, X spelling. And the other thing to notice about Steranko's trilogy is that he requested ahead of time to know where all those ads that he had to do were being put in the issue, and he paced the story accordingly, both verbally and visually. And it starts here. I mean, imagine today's graphic novels, nobody's got to deal with intrusive ads. But imagine you're Steranko and you have to deal with this shit on the opposite of your masterpiece. Am I getting across some of my exasperation when I looked at pages like this? And I felt like if my job today is to recreate the experience of actually, this is what we had and Steranko had to deal with. The other thing to notice about Steranko's approach visually is his use of white space to break up the density of the page. Look at the two center panels and how he lets the white space bleed in. And knowing that even though these are single pages, everything when you're designing a page-turn experience, you are designing double-page spreads, whether you like it or not. So even if they're two single units, he's still designing it to make use of the white gutter space. And the pacing, knowing that he has to have a double-page spread ads, he gives you always at the bottom right corner a climactic or impactic panel because he knew you had to deal with this stuff. Now, we love some of this stuff, and we can talk about this later. But that's what Steranko had to deal with before we came back to the story. And again, the use of white space, the very, intense camera angles and switches of viewpoint. Steranko is giving you his Captain America film. Now, an image like this, I bet you Steranko had photo reference of a soldier in that position. It's almost too in your face, but you can just see how Steranko designed his panels for maximum depth of field and impact, and just like a movie director will put things in sharp focus. Once again, even if it's not continued, the bottom right panel is always a climactic panel within the story. It's like writing a great paragraph. The paragraph within a chapter doesn't have to be the star of the show, but it has to lead in from the last paragraph and lead into the next one. And that's the way Steranko's stories are paced. Now, look at the graphics here. We get the cinematic, one scene divided up into as if the camera is panning. That's, again, film on paper. But look at the design of Steranko trying to get across Captain America's loneliness and how this staircase does not exist in reality. But once again, look at the influence of Will Eisner in this Spirit page and how he does the same thing. Eisner's father was a theater set prop designer. So Eisner understood about planes and stylization. And obviously Steranko did too. Turn the page. Again, he wanted to bring back, he even said, I wanted to restore the kid sidekick concept. So he has Rick Jones, who was the Snapper Carr of Marvel, if anybody knows the Snapper Carr reference. But he was, he represented, he was like the Robin of Marvel Comics. So there he is, going to be the new Bucky, but the whole point is Captain America is filled with, post-traumatic stress disorder of Bucky dying in World War II and feeling guilty about it. So that's really the arc of this whole trilogy. Again, we get to the bottom right, and look what happens when we turn the page this time. We're hit with the first of Steranko's 3 Captain America double-page spreads paced in each of the 3 trilogy issues. Again, Kirby had established, this is only a year before when he was doing the book. Of course, this is a big motif. And Kirby in the 40s was really the first comic artist to really use the double-page spread as a spread to impact the reader in the story. And that's partly what Steranko is paying homage to. And again, I could have gotten an image that showed a perfect, seamless image. Some of the other double-page spreads, that's what I got. But this is what we, the reader, were actually confronted with, but we didn't mind, so to speak. The other thing to notice is the big foreground head, which is another classic Kirby motif, seen only here a year earlier. So Steranko is always paying homage at the same time he's giving us something new. Now, if you think about manga and anime, this idea of jump cutting to a graphic intercut to switch point of views is something manga and anime artists use all the time. But in 1969, this was pretty new. But again, Steranko had been doing this in S.H.I.E.L.D. a year and 2 years earlier. The same type of setups. But again, look at how he does it very graphically in this issue. Once again, come down to the bottom right, and we get another beautiful impact panel. Once again, look at the stylized monochromatic coloring that Steranko does. Look at the expressive, great, you know, Sam Rosen lettering. Turn the page, you had to deal with this. Anybody old enough to remember buying back issues from Howard Rogofsky? Okay, there we go. Here Steranko introduces the villain of the piece, Madam Hydra. We'll talk about her in a little while. We turn the page. You can recognize some of the action panels that I used in my opening introduction with the Captain America cartoon song. Notice again the use of white space to break up the page and let it breathe. And then we get the final spread. Notice the stylized coloring. I mean, brown, would anybody use brown or olive brown, whatever that color is? Steranko used it. And, you know, look at the color. I mean, again, the hand coloring alone is interesting to see the colors that he chose for various things. If you look at the last panel, once again, just like a film, the last image with a very foreshadowing verbal message, this reminded me of the last page of issue 1, one of Steranko's greatest. Inked by Joe Sinnott again. I mean, come on. You get the telephone cord dividing up the image, the lettering, everything. The force lines that he got from Kirby, and a change from color to black and white. Again, that was the last page of that psychedelic issue. A couple of issues later, Steranko returned to that psychedelic motif, and it's this cover that is most like the white cover to the second part of the trilogy. One of Steranko's greatest covers that you'll see has been repeated over and over again. But then you open up the cover to be revealed this splash page. Are you kidding me? We had never seen anything like this. I mean, where do you begin analyzing this? First of all, notice right now, immediately you get the feeling that you're jump cutting around an arcade. But look at how just a year earlier in S.H.I.E.L.D., he had used similar panel arrangement, but this time it's in a narrative where he wants you to follow along in a certain specific way. But that's not true here. You could really read this page any way you want. Now remember I said, notice the great variety of lettering that Joe Rosen is able to pull off. Even if it's penciled by Steranko, you still got to be able to pull it off. The great climax, again, at the bottom right page. Now remember I said Steranko also hand-colored these pages? I mean, all comic book coloring is hand-colored. Here is the actual colored dyes on a black and white photostat. The way comic book coloring was done was on photostats. So colorists were not looking at sepia yellow age paper. They were looking at pure blacks and pure whites. And then Steranko came in and using liquid dyes like Dr. Martin dyes would hand color, and then these pages would then get marked up with various things, you know, yellow 9, and, you know, a color artist had to figure out combinations of flat color. Don't even get me started. It's a whole process. It's a whole art form. And there's the finished printed page. Beautiful. Open up that splash page and you're met with this. Once again, look at the hand-colored Steranko photostat. And look how close that coloring is to the finished printed image. This is old school comic book coloring at its finest, folks. You can have all your computer coloring. I'll take this, baby. Now, in this panel, you get the whole theme of the issue. Of the trilogy, I mean, is that the bad guys knew where to hit Steve Rogers because earlier in Captain America, a year before, Kirby had decided to reveal his secret identity to the world in the modern time. There's the panel, inked by Joe Sinnott. But Steranko thought that was stupid. And he said, I wanted to restore the kid concept, and I wanted to restore Captain America to having a secret identity. He felt this was a bad move for the character. Again, great action panel, Steranko doing his best Kirby, force lines, everything we've been talking about. Look at the choice of the brown coloring. Once again, you have to deal with the next page. I mean, do you believe the publishers felt kids had to be told that the story was not on that page? Thank you for thinking we're total idiots, DC and Marvel Comics. Great action panel. Again, great Joe Rosen lettering, force lines, the use of white space to open up the panel. Speaking of white space, look at how he introduces Madam Hydra. I mean, she's white skinned, the white page, and again, the beautiful mix of black and white to color. When I think of Citizen Kane and how it starts with that great black and white newsreel footage, I think of Steranko in some way was getting that feeling of that image, but knowing how to silhouette and when to silhouette and when to treat an image and the use of Zipatone. No other artist other than Neil Adams, who really was doing it just like Steranko, was using Zipatone in this fashion. In my book, The Silver Age, in the Steranko chapter, I pay homage to this by highlighting all of his famous white covers and the use of color, red, yellow, and blue. We'll talk about the boom a little later in the trilogy. Then, of course, you come down. Now look at the stylized monochrome use of blues. And the sensitive inks by Sinnott. I mean, they were like the perfect team, just like Kirby and Sinnott were. Continued after this crap, although, again, we love the merchandising. Turn the page. Once again, look at the variety of illustrative techniques that Steranko brings in as a combination illustrator, graphic designer to get across the feeling and the mood of the verbal. This is what comics are, verbal and visual imagery working together. Now, this again looks to me like a piece of photo reference from some old 1940s film, but Steranko, as a great artist, knows how and when to use photo reference, knows when to do the use of black and white to evoke memory. I mean, there are books about this. James Romberger did a recent book with Steranko where they analyze almost every panel of every page Steranko drew for Marvel, and they talk about, oh, well, my use of jump cutting and blah, 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 blah. So if you're into it, there's actually a book all about it. But, I mean, look at what he gives us just on this one page. Another beautiful cinematic time breakup. You go up to the upper right page, you get another use of multiple imagery that only comics can give you. But in film, you've seen scenes where there's a person's face and then the director brings in and dissolves in overlapping imagery. This is what we talk about when we talk about comics being film on paper. It's film, but it's not film. The dramatic point at the bottom of the right, when Bucky finds this letter, open his door, you turn the page and you're hit with this surrealist mini masterpiece. Once again, Steranko, a year before in S.H.I.E.L.D., December '68, when he wasn't even doing the interiors anymore, gave us this beautiful homage to Dolly and Magritte and everybody, and there's Steranko doing it. Needless to say, the use of white space, the beautiful coloring. I mean, Steranko actually designed those clouds, and a housewife in Connecticut had to cut that out of a metal screen or whatever the hell they did. Once again, the type floating on the white versus in a box. Steranko knew when to do that to open up the space. If you know your Dolly, you'll know that this is a still from the 1945 or 49 Spellbound, in which they animated and mixed with live action some of Dolly's, surrealist sequences for the film, and you could see that Steranko was paying homage to that there. Once again, the use of these off colors, a burnt orange, a brown. I mean, other colorists might have colored that, red and green or, violating colors, but again, a very odd color choice, and yet, with the grays, it works. And you had to look at that at the same time. Then you get like a part 2 to this incredible surrealist image. Now, I bet you Steranko intended this to be the spread. Because once again, look at how perfectly the type aligns with this graphic image so that the white space beautifully flows. That had to be intentional. unless it's just a happy accident. But of course, it was not like this. We had to see it this way. Not too bad. Once again, look at the beautiful gradation between purple, orange to yellow. That's not computer coloring. Those are hand-cut screens, and yet the right choice of color, it's not hard-edged, it flows. The offbeat color choices for that row of Bucky faces culminate in this. Once again, film on paper. You can imagine this in a movie, the faces changing and the skull. Steranko gives it to us on the comic book page. Once again, the bottom right. Look at the impact. Look at how Steranko decides to do this. The character is leaving the room, and then he's got Captain America coming towards us as if he's left the room. Then you turn the page, and all of a sudden you're outside in this incredible double-page spread. Right? Remember that manga panel? Here's a kind of another variation where Steranko in one image gives us both viewpoints with that stylized foreshortening. Great lettering once again by Joe Rosen. Look at the use of the decision to go high contrast black and white. The beautiful monochromatic blues. By the way, notice how in this panel, as I pan past it, the bad guy is shooting the other bad guy. Steranko doesn't even show the bad guy getting hit. What he shows us is that image, which we as the reader can put together what happened in our minds. But that's the greatness of comics, is that Steranko gives us that whole scene without actually showing us anything, really. I mean, he shows us anything and everything. Turn the page, you get another page of ads. Once again, this looks like a piece of photo reference to me from some film noir that he adapts to Captain America. Another cinematic panel breakup. More great action panels that Steranko obviously loved to draw about Captain America. I think Steranko also said Captain America was his favorite character to draw, even above Nick Fury, probably for the same reasons that Kirby liked drawing him. It was pure action. And then you get the final double-page spread in the second issue of the trilogy. Once again, that looks like a piece of photo reference on the upper left that he adapts to his uses. The use of monochromatic coloring, the great lettering. Of course, you get to the, I mean, look at this, look at that. The weird browns again, the offbeat oranges, obviously green for Hydra. But there you go, hard-edged, and yet it looks like smooth computer coloring almost. The use of white space to break up that panel. And then you get this final panel. It seems like they killed Captain America and they pick up Steve Rogers' face. Now remember, Steranko's whole point in doing this trilogy was to reestablish that Captain America is not Steve Rogers. So we couldn't wait for the next issue. But what did we get when we got the next issue? A cover by Kirby. What's going on? Well, it turns out that Steranko missed the deadline for the third issue because he was giving us like a masterwork. But comics had to be published, so they turned to the man himself, Jack Kirby, shown here with a photostat of that cover right behind him, so he must have liked that cover or whatever. And, you know, this is maybe in the mid-70s, so imagine him a couple years earlier. But he decides either over a weekend or metaphorically over a weekend, but knowing Kirby, he probably did do this entire issue over the weekend, and to make it easy on Kirby, Kirby decided, I'll just give you a Captain America's greatest hits. But look at how Stan Lee, who wrote the dialogue, actually excuses this issue. So unexpected, so totally shocking have been the latest developments in the legend of Captain America that your bullpen feels compelled to present this unique souvenir issue. That's called turning a negative into a positive. So what does Kirby give us over the next 20 or so pages? You know, we've had so many deaths of superheroes. This was one of the first deaths of a mainstream superhero in the Silver Age, at Marvel, at least. Yeah, I know DC did some other things too. But yeah, and I'm not going to waste time showing you the ads Kirby had to deal with. You already got that idea. But it's basically Kirby just drawing us Captain America's history spread out over 20 pages. So, and you know, really nice inks by George Tuska. Great always to see, just like Kirby rarely did the red and yellow Iron Man. Very rare that we would get the Kirby Submariner, but many people feel it's more definitive than even Bill Everett's, the creators. Again, Captain America's greatest hits. Kirby at the peak of his powers. And then we get to the last panel, and you will be avenged. Things are never what they seem. And then we get this issue with that great Gothic cover. One of his greatest Captain America figures. Anybody remember that Superman cover by Kurt Swan, the Silver Annual? I mean, that was Steranko doing his version of it. To this day, I'm not sure whether Bucky was miscolored or whether Steranko intended that to be that kind of nighttime light. How a blue might change into a green, that means yellow. I don't know. To me, that looks like a really bad miscoloring, but remind me to email Steranko and I'll ask him. You open up this cover, the first thing you're confronted with when you see this great splash page is the fact that the story is being told through the television screens. Now, for the last 30 plus years, it's been the influence of Dark Knight that most people think was the first to do this idea of telling the story through television panels. But I believe it was, and Adams does this in X-Men later on in 1969, but I think this is the first modern usage of TV panels to tell the story. Now, the other thing we notice is that Joe Sinnott is not there. We see Tom Palmer as the inker. Now, remember that 1969 Marvel photo page? There is young Tom Palmer. I think he was 21 years old in 1968 when he broke into comics. He starts inking Gene Colan on Doctor Strange, and maybe over the next 2 years gives us the definitive post-Ditko Doctor Strange. I mean, double-page spreads like this, you know, Palmer's considered Colan's soulmate inker. Then he inked Neil Adams on X-Men later in '69, and there's the first splash page by the two of them together. Palmer's also known as John Buscema's greatest superhero inker when he inks a stretch of Avengers in the late 60s and early 70s. And yet, Steranko, in this Romberger book, which came out only this year, goes on record as saying he did not care for Palmer's inks. Very rare for a professional to call out another professional's work while they're alive. You know, Neil Adams waited until Giordano passed before he came out. I was there in a New York comic convention where he says, you know, I really don't think Dick did a good job in a lot of places, and I had always felt that Giordano was Neil's third distant best inker after Neil himself and Tom Palmer. But Steranko, and he said throughout this issue, most of the figures of Captain America he went in and re-inked. So that means he really did not like. I think opinion is split. I think a lot of people love Palmer's inks on this issue, but I think just as many people don't. I love Tom Palmer, but his inks do seem a little scratchy, a little flinty, if I'm using the word flinty correctly. By the way, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. I wanted to show you that the origin of Madame Hydra, that she was a young child during the Revolution, and it's very much like what Tarantino did when he did Kill Bill, which is taken from anime, with this whole idea of the young girl traumatized early in life and comes back to take her revenge. But again, Steranko was doing it in 1968, 69, way before anybody else was doing this. So I'd like to think some of that